Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to our session. I believe this is the last session for the day, so I appreciate everyone joining us. The session this afternoon is on leveraging IoT to streamline operations and deliver a better occupant experience. And I am thrilled with the panel that we have gathered together this afternoon. The first thing I want to do is let each of the panelists introduce themselves, tell a little bit about who they are, what they do, who their company is, and what your company does as well. So let's go ladies first. So Beatrice, why don't we kick off with you?
Thank you. Thanks also, Darlene, for having us all on the panel today. I'm very excited to be here. I'm a German trained architect turned award-winning lighting designer and smart lighting expert. I founded two businesses. One is a design and design consultancy company focusing around lighting, smart buildings, working with manufacturers as well on a project base. And the second company is an award-winning smart lighting platform called Lumify. And I'm here excited to speak with everyone about this topic.
Great. And Beatrice and I actually met several years ago at a lighting conference. We were on a session together, and it was very thrilling for me to have someone who was an architect and a lighting expert talking about IoT. So very glad to have you with us today. Let's go to Tim.
Yeah, hi, Tim Dentry. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Wind Connectivity. Wind Connectivity is a 20-plus-year-old traditional systems integrator for cellular wireless that has made the shift into managed service provider for any kind of wireless, really, but primarily around distributed antenna systems and CBRS. So we are very much in the arena of IoT, very excited to be talking about this. I've been in enterprise IT, not so much wireless, but enterprise IT, data center infrastructure, and networking and cybersecurity for about 25 years now. And so very excited to be able to provide some insight to this topic.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Darlene. I'm Chris Wixom. I lead the enterprise side of the business for JMA. JMA is a US-based manufacturer of in-building connectivity solutions. We really provide a mixture of a variety of different solutions, 4G and 5G neutral host DAS. We're probably one of the leading providers of CBRS or private networking. And I'll just say to kick things off, it is an incredibly exciting time for me in this industry with the advent of 5G, CBRS, private networking, IoT applications. And it's exciting to see the business models evolve just incredibly with the rapidity that they're doing. It's a pretty amazing time.
Great. And last but not least, Emmanuel Daniel with Microsoft.
Hi, Darlene. Thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be on the panel. My name is Emmanuel Daniel. I'm from Microsoft, and I lead the solution and transformation of our Redmond campus program, along with my friends and colleagues from the Microsoft Real Estate and Security team. That basically involves modernizing and digitizing and defining the experiences for the new East Campus that we're bringing up here in Redmond.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about what Microsoft does? No, I'm just kidding. So let's just kick off the discussion around IoT. And one of the things I love about this topic is I think it pulls everything together. We've spent the last 2 days talking about the building network, talking about wireless connectivity and CBRS, and talking about digital workplace and smart buildings. And I think this kind of conversation pulls it all together because you've got to have the network, you have to have the connectivity, you've got to have the devices, you have to have a smart workplace, you've got to have smart buildings. And at the end of the day, this kind of pulls it all together, right? So what I want to do is kind of get your perspective on what IoT is, because I know you hear a lot about IoT, but not a lot of people really understand tangibly what that means. So Emmanuel, why don't you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about what is IoT and how is Microsoft using IoT in your new campus?
Sure. At the simplest level, IoT is nothing but a bunch of devices that are interconnected with each other. Where it gets challenging is identifying the right type of device that you need to be able to capture the data that you would like to cater to the experiences that you want to provide for the occupants in that space. For our new campus, our challenge has always been, how do we make that space effective, whereby space is no longer just space. It's about bringing people together, engaging, collaborating. To do that, what type of data do you need to capture? And to capture that data, what type of device do you need? Securing that device, connecting that device, bringing it all together so that you can deliver amazing experiences that delight the people in that space is what we're trying to do.
So Beatrice, again, I love having a lighting specialist and architect on the panel with us today. Talk a little bit about how lighting has evolved from traditional illumination, if you will, to this discussion about IoT.
Yeah, first of all, lighting control has been, for decades in the industry, and it's typically a wired backbone and therefore fairly dumb. For me, IoT becomes exciting because typically it applies, it's, connected devices that talk to each other. It's a two-way communication potentially, and also a way to gather data in that aspect. And it applies for me also wireless communication, and often the use of the cloud, which then transfers the data. Mm-hmm. In terms of lighting, it was typically the lighting control, on-off, energy savings. That was the main driver behind lighting controls. But now it really is changing. First, from just like, let's go and see how much we can save some dollars, to the user experience, to personalization, to automation. That is kind of now that wireless controls can bring to the table. But then once you bring it also to the cloud, you can have remote access and access to the data and the dashboards, which becomes really interesting. This is the traditional kind of lighting application, but now that you have the system in place, and this is where it really becomes interesting, is you can make it connect to other systems. For example, one lighting manufacturer which started off in lighting controls is now with a new user case really in the forefront around with COVID, with asset tracking. They turned from asset tracking to actually people tracking, to contact tracing. So it is really changing and pivoting, and that becomes the power of IoT, that you look outside the box from an original defined user case. But now that you can interconnect the system, you can create new user cases and applications, and that makes it so interesting and exciting at this time.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great, because we've got smart workplaces and smart buildings and now smart ceilings. So with the installation of sensors, really using the ceiling and that lighting network and lighting control system for more than just illuminating space. So Tim, let's go to you. What is your definition of IoT, and what is Wind Connectivity doing in the IoT space?
Yeah, so I would lump IoT into three different categories. You'd have like machine-to-machine communications, traditional machine-to-machine communications. Then you would have critical IoT, as well as you would also have massive IoT. And the difference being is the traffic type that each one uses, and for communication either between machine-to-machine or cloud to machine or cloud to sensor. And then also the type of reliability and latency that it needs from the sense of traffic and being able to manage the traffic across the network. So for example, massive IoT latency is not as critical. So these might be data collected from temperature and motion sensors versus critical IoT, which might be sensors that are performing some surveillance activity, which requires ultra reliability, low latency. So I would classify those three types of IoT, and then from there determine which type of IoT is what you're using. And then there you might look at, okay, what is the network requirement in the building that I need to deploy to support those?
Mm-hmm. So Chris, tell us a little bit about, what are some of the steps needed to design and deploy an IoT strategy or an IoT network in a building?
Well, as you know, probably the trickiest part of providing a IoT network is to provide the connectivity for it, and that's where JMA fits in. So we do both neutral host in terms of connectivity for IoT devices that a carrier could provide, but then also on the private networking side, and that's something called CBRS, or the 3.5 gigahertz network. And so we've been working with a variety of verticals, including commercial real estate, in enabling that to happen.
So let's talk a little bit, Chris, about, what are some of the applications or the use cases? Let's talk about tangible use of IoT. So what are some of the applications that would run over an IoT network?
Yeah, so the way I think about it right now, you're really trying to do two things primarily. One, you're trying to drive efficiency, and two, you're trying to improve the experience. I was talking to one CRE leader yesterday, and take New York City as an example. There is a pretty large availability of property right now, particularly in older buildings. And so what are they trying to do? They're trying to drive the efficiency to increase the occupancy rate and then also improve the experience. So on the efficiency side, there are all sorts of applications out there, companies like Prescriptive Data that do HVAC efficiencies. You can literally, through having sensors on a floor-by-floor basis, reduce your HVAC cost by about 30 to 40%. So that's just one example on the efficiency side. On the customer experience side, how do I do things like touchless entry or even drive safety? How do I optimize the use of elevators going up and down the elevators? Or for that matter, how do I put sensors on a floor-by-floor basis so that I can optimize the space? I think Emmanuel was talking about optimizing space. How do I optimize the space better to drive efficiencies in the building and then also to improve the experience?
So Emmanuel, let's talk a little bit about, again, some of those applications of IoT, specifically at Microsoft, and how do you measure the business value of some of those applications?
So it's to give it up, I just want to touch 2 points from both Tim and Beatrice. The business value ultimately is going to tie back to the type of data you're going to capture, and the data depends upon the type of communication you're going to have between the assets. Now, how the assets are connected, are they going to be a wired backhaul? Are they going to be wireless? Really depends upon the experience you're willing to drive. Now, if I take it in terms of critical assets, let's take something as simple as a backup generator. The criticality of the backup generator not being able to come on in case of an outage is catastrophic. So for me to be able to use IoT devices to figure out how is the generator doing, how are the bearings inside the generator performing, right? Is the vibration when I'm testing the generator, okay, is it aligned to how a normal generator should function? Okay, is the value that I have to ensure in case of an outage, everything will work seamlessly. The second aspect is in terms of facilities and operations. How do I drive efficiency of the facilities by ensuring common tasks could be automated, by ensuring data needed to ensure the uptime, reliability, and the performance of the building facilities are maintained on time? Now, this is something that we all take for granted. The next evolution of that, so we start with critical assets, we start with facilities where it's all about efficiency and optimization. As we scale up, we now start engaging with people, humans. How do I create space that, one, is going to be safe, secure, and healthy? How do I create a space that when I go in, based on, let's say, the light levels, based on the noise levels, based on engagement biophilia levels, okay, it creates an atmosphere or an environment where I'm able to perform at a much higher level. Therefore, I love to come to that building and to that space and to create that work. So engaging not only on efficiency and optimization, but also on engagement and productivity of the human beings is the next churn of ROI that we're looking at very deeply across our buildings.
So Tim, let's talk a little bit about what are the components of an IoT strategy, because again, people hear about IoT and it's basically every device that could possibly be connected. So everything's connected. Windows are connected, you know, our phones are connected, our computers are connected, our doors are connected, our lights, and everything's connected. And so that seems really complicated and complex. So how do you start in terms of putting together some type of a managed IoT strategy?
I think the first thing, I think what Emmanuel mentioned and what Chris has mentioned is you have to understand the network requirements that the IoT assets are going to use. So, for example, Emmanuel mentioned something that's near and dear to my heart, which is business continuity when he mentioned the generator. So I would fall back into my cybersecurity mode, which is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to think about defense in depth, protecting those crown jewels, because in commercial real estate, as an example, these IoT applications are quickly becoming the crown jewels. So you have to first think about, okay, what does my defense in depth strategy look like? And that could include, for example, a good program for vulnerability management off the provider's systems and tools themselves, because the IoT is not just one device, it's a system and it's an ecosystem. So you have to figure out, okay, how do I protect that ecosystem? So a good vulnerability management program is key. A good integrator is key to make sure that simple things like basic passwords are changed on the systems. And believe it or not, out of the box, there have been many security studies that have been done where, you know, these quick to market IoT devices and systems do not follow basic security hygiene. So you have to start there and determine, okay, what is my security posture going to look like? What do I need it to look like? And then from there, you kind of layer in, okay, beyond that, beyond the sort of the kernel level or the inside, what does my network connectivity look like? And for example, if I were to use CBRS versus an LTE network, a commercial carrier network, why would I do that? Well, because it's intrinsically secure, and it maps neatly to enterprise IT standards from a security and identity standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, then you can layer on where and how you're going to use it to where what Emmanuel mentioned, to make the best user experience or tenant experience that you can possibly give to that person. So that is where I would start. Those are critical elements to get started with any IoT program.
Yeah, and that's great in terms of physically designing the network from a technical standpoint. Let's take a little bit of a step back though, Beatrice, and let's talk about, when you're working with clients, what are the features and functionality that they're trying to enable through use of IoT? So I would think that there's really that tangible, what are we trying to accomplish before we even get into how do we design the network, which obviously the network is critical, but talk to us a little bit about what are you hearing from clients in terms of the features and functionality that they're trying to enable through IoT?
I think generally, when we're talking about how do you develop an IoT strategy, we should start with the user case, the scenario, the problem we're trying to solve before we go to the technical requirements to build up that communication network. And I think we all need to first then, before we start to define the problem, ask who is our customer or client. And I think that's a very clear differentiator. Is it the property owner? Is it the building operator or the end user? And they all have different things they want to address and appeal to. The end user is right now all about the experience, touchless or health, lighting even now is moving to health application with the UVC lighting or application or devices. So there's a whole different set of problems to solve, while operations is about let's make sure this doesn't break, fine. And that has been already addressed in traditional technology, with wire technology, but IoT really gives us a whole new level to create new user cases, to develop new solutions and user scenarios. And this is, I think, where the industry in generally has a little bit of a gap. You have a lot of engineers on the table who don't really have the connection to the end user, and the end user doesn't know how to translate it into the technical requirements. And that is, I think, a gap that is really not completely leveraging the possibilities that are ahead of us, that we can address with this technology in place. So I think that is for me the biggest point. What is our user case scenario? Can we think beyond the box? Like now we have all these different platforms. If we connect this platform with that one, maybe we create a whole different scenario or solution that we can solve. And I think that's, a missed opportunity that I see right now in the industry.
No, I agree. And I think, when I think of IoT in a building, I think of, the Internet of Things, or things talking to other things connecting with other things, systems connecting to other systems. It's not just sensors feeding data to a Tableau dashboard and giving you a report of what happened yesterday. So if we focus on real-time data and we focus on the connectivity of those systems and those edge devices themselves, I think that's really the power of IoT. So for example, a car pulls into the parking garage at the P3 level, a sensor identifies there's a car at the P3 level and automatically dispatches an elevator to go down to P3 because it knows someone's going to need an elevator. So that to me is an example of a use case that needs that backbone and that connectivity and that network to be able to function and work properly. So Chris, let's go back to talking a little bit about the network itself. And I know, especially with, things like CBRS, how does CBRS help a building owner kind of build their own private network to be able to support some of those use cases?
Well, I think Tim hit it early on. I mean, there are probably 3 or 4 benefits of a CBRS network. One of them is security. So as you put all these IoT devices and other things on the network, you've got to have it be secure. So CBRS is inherently more secure because it's either based on a 4G LTE or a 5G based system, which is inherently more secure than Wi-Fi or anything else. So that's number one. Number two is connectivity for the devices. So if I look at partners that we're working with right now, in many cases, even these sensors are hardwired. And so they have a very difficult time hitting each floor, or much less in different, different rooms throughout the floor. So if I can go to a CBRS solution instead of Wi-Fi or instead of hardwired, I have much more flexibility in what I can do in the building, right? I have control over that CBRS network. I have control on where I've got access and what IoT or other types of devices that I can put on the network. And then the third part would be, I now have higher reliability and then also higher throughput. So you've got 150 megahertz of spectrum there that you can use. And with that, I can divide that 150 megahertz into 10 megahertz channels, or, depending on what the level of capacity that I need. But I can do about 1.6 megabits per second per channel. And that way I can put many applications on it and do a variety of different things with the network and have it be secure.
Let me ask you a question, Chris. So everyone's familiar with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and even to a certain extent, LoRaWAN and 900 megahertz networks. When you talk about CBRS, are there a lot of devices that can inherently run over CBRS, or do they require specific IoT devices?
Yeah, very, very good question. So on the IoT side, I would say, the IoT side has not caught up with 3.5. So I'd say, at least on the people that I've talked to, there are very few 3.5 enabled IoT devices themselves. However, there are many gateway manufacturers out there that any IP related device or any IoT device can connect to, either through Zigbee or these different protocols, or a direct connect with a dongle or those types of things. So you can do an IoT type of deployment very cost effectively over 3.5, but in general, people are using gateways of some form or fashion.
Okay, great. So Emmanuel, let's talk a little bit again about the multiple stakeholders that are involved in an IoT deployment. So we've kind of talked about IoT from an efficiency, occupant experience, space management through occupancy. So when you've been looking at deploying IoT in your new campus, I'm assuming there's a lot of stakeholders that you need to work with to understand what their business drivers are, what their priorities are. Talk to us a little bit about who your kind of internal customers are for IoT, and also what are some of the biggest obstacles that you've had to overcome in order to deploy a successful IoT strategy.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. The first thing, the biggest customers for us are the employees, the visitors, the guests, their families and friends who are going to use that space. The goal for us is to ensure that we create that space so that they love to come and consume it, while it is secure, connected, accessible, and sustainable. This is what we're trying to do. Now, when we have to pull together a strategy, it is very easy to go and ask someone, hey, what do you want? The question and the challenge always is wants versus needs. Okay, is this something that they'll use for just 30 minutes of a day and forget about it? Or is this something that they will use and they'll get so used to it, they will eventually forget about the underlying service, where they move from delight to a necessity? So for us, our whole goal was, one, understand what do the employees want? And for that, we carried out behavioral analysis of the different types of styles, requirements that they would need. Two is understand how do we maintain the facilities? How do we maintain the device? All of a sudden, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of data points that are going to come into a building, and buildings have already been treasure troves of data with BMS systems, with lighting management systems, with parking systems. Now, added to that, I'm bringing in more IoT devices. How do I manage these devices? And that's where IT starts to come in. And I think Chris made a great point. With the connectivity option of the devices, a larger challenge we're now running into is what is going to be our edge strategy versus our cloud strategy, because ultimately it comes to managing these devices. That's where facility comes in. And as we start to bring facilities in and I say, okay, hey, look, a lighting management system is no longer a lighting management system. It is a system that runs over PoE, it brings power, it carries data. So in case of an outage of a light and I lose my access to data, does that mean the experience fails? So in that case, who's going to respond? Is it going to be the facilities team, or is it going to be the IT team? And bringing in the network angle, because I have power and data running over the same backhaul, How do I secure that network so that people just don't come in, plug devices onto it? Now, evolving from there, the next layer has always been, how do we cross-train facilities and IT to become one functioning unit? How they manage it, how they sustain it. And last of all is evolving it as a whole to help the users understand privacy and ethics in terms of the data that we're going to capture and why is this data necessary? Because ultimately for us, I can build amazing services, and if nobody uses those services that is powered by my data, the whole building has failed, right? So for us, stakeholder groups has grown tremendously, where it's not just about buildings and facilities, it's about users, it's about guests, it's about IT, it's about networking, it's about security. Bringing all these folks together is difficult. Everybody wants to do the right thing, but the question is, how are you going to piece it all together? There is no one size fits all option, right? It has to be catered to the building, the type of the building, the type of the people that are operating in that building. Weaving this together and uniting the flows of data from heterogeneous systems that exist in a building is one of the biggest challenges we've been facing.
Mm-hmm. No, it sounds as if when we talk about, the 330-300 principle, that you are very focused on the 300, which is that employee experience. And then kind of that second is the space management, especially now with COVID and de-densification, things like that. And while energy is still a big component of a smart building, it seems that our business priorities have kind of shifted drastically. Especially with having to respond to COVID. So Tim, let's go back to talking about, Emmanuel mentioned edge devices and cloud computing and things like that. And that all goes back to the network. So talk to us a little bit about, is IoT making things easier? Or is it making things more complicated? So the difference between kind of edge computing versus getting that data all the way from the edge devices up into the cloud. Talk to us a little bit about how all that works.
It's going to depend on what vantage point you're coming from, but I think when you think about the use cases like what Emmanuel and Beatrice have mentioned with like microclimate, smart lighting, air quality measurements, predictive maintenance for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, some of those use cases that you can achieve with IoT, clearly that makes certain people's business and day-to-day functions easier. From the perspective of bridging IT and what Emmanuel mentioned as facilities, or what I would call OT, operational technology teams, that is in across many industries. That's a challenge, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's manufacturing automation, OT, IT, and the constituents within them. There's a closing gap, but I wouldn't say it's closed, and it doesn't sound like it's closing in commercial real estate any quicker. So what you have to do there is you have to figure out, okay, well, what does that mean if I'm using, for example, a good case in point is, AWS Greengrass or Azure IoT. If you're using edge computing for a purpose to make sure data stays on premise, either for security compliance or just making sure that you don't blow your AWS bill sky high or your Azure bill sky highs, or then those are going to be choices that you make when you select your IoT vendors and your ecosystem of partners. So from a network standpoint, beyond just the security and like what Chris had mentioned with the reliability of what CBRS provides versus Wi-Fi, and also just covering miles rather than meters, you're going to also determine, okay, from the edge to the cloud, what data is sensitive and where do I want that to go, and how do I want it to get there? Because much of the protocols that are driving IoT today, and industrial IoT or critical IoT, they are not secure inherently. So that means that you have to consider that gap between when it leaves the premise, if it does leave the premise, and to where it goes into the cloud. So there are many implications in designing that telemetry network that should be considered in conjunction with just the overall connectivity around it.
Mm-hmm. Chris, did you have a follow-up from some of Emmanuel's comments?
I was just going to say I find it absolutely fascinating to listen to everybody speak. But one thing that I wanted to add to Emmanuel's comment was we've got all these sensors, we've got the connectivity and all the data that comes from it. But the data itself is meaningless unless you have actionable intelligence that you can drive from it. And so that does require, as Emmanuel said, for all these different organizations to come together and work together, but it also means that the different data platforms that are also many times are in silos, to bring them together so that you can actually take these different areas within an organization and actually come up with actionable intelligence, and then change the way you do things based on that actual intelligence.
Mm-hmm. And Beatrice, we talk about workplaces becoming smarter and smarter, and lighting becoming smarter, and buildings becoming smarter, and obviously IoT being a big part of this. To tell us a little bit about how you see IoT contributing to smart buildings and ultimately that enhanced occupant experience.
I think, first of all, it empowers the users a lot more with the interfaces that we are creating now. I mean, Chris just mentioned, like we have now all this data, what do we do with it? And I think when we address the interfaces, user can engage with it more and make more sense of it. And it increases, it brings the technology part away from just the operations of a building and the maintenance of a building to also involving the end user and the clients and the people who occupy it, and to look at the user cases, what makes sense for them in a space. And it's not just about, oh, this light is broken, we need to replace it. It's like, okay, can we light the path onto a situation that they want to be in? Or in the user case with Enlightened, who went from energy management to now actually asset or people tracking and contact tracing, which used these light fixtures with sensors, then into other user cases. I think that is where the power lays, that you're transforming it now, that you have the backbone of the technology, and now you can start pivoting it and leveraging it. And what do you do with the data and the different user cases? And COVID, I think, definitely accelerated some of the transformational aspects in the workspace, and also on how occupants, what they have a louder voice now, because a lot more is about their concerns and their comfort level and their experience in a building. So that right now drives a lot of the IoT technology.
Mm-hmm. So Beatrice, you mentioned end user experience and end user controls. And it's interesting, I heard on a panel earlier that engineers still don't want building occupants changing temperature or changing set points within a building, which, when you look at the future of work and the future of IoT applications, one of the most enabling technologies is for the end user to be able to pick up their device and say, cool my space, and it automatically communicates with a device above their head and increases airflow instantaneously. And so thereby reducing hot and cold calls tremendously. So how do you feel about this kind of debate between giving the end user control over their space? Because the technology is certainly there to be able to do it. I'm sure you're seeing it in the lighting world. So let's talk about that a little bit. Where is that, that acceptance of being able to kind of transfer control over to the end user?
First of all, I'm a big proponent to give the end user, empower the end users. I think there's some consideration that you need to incorporate. One is context, having an individual user changing a big, office space where everybody communal works in the same space without individual separation might be a little bit tricky. Then there should probably be an algorithm in between to say, okay, if 10 people say it's too warm and 3 people say it's too cold, maybe we'll meet in the middle. That can be also now automated. In lighting, it's a little bit different because it's more localized than the temperature. So we can do it a lot better and say, okay, this person really works better with 3,500 Kelvin color temperature, while this person really gets irritated if it's that cold lighting and rather wants the one lighting, because that is more granular now. And we have now individualized control points, which we didn't have before when everything was on one circuit. Now we can really control the light that's above us or on our table. So that is definitely a different kind of level where we can more individualize than the temperature control. But I do think we should give the end users more control over it, because that's what the technology offers us. We want to personalize our home. Why can we not personalize other spaces that we occupy immensely? And it really goes into the occupancy experience. We had earlier a panel, somebody was speaking about like if they don't feel comfortable to go in that place, or if it's too hot or too cold, the efficiency of people goes down. There's a lot of science now coming to the market that, for example, the right lighting really empowers, has a chemical, basically a chemical effect on people's efficiency, how they are focused, how awake they are, how alert they are. So we can really start to incorporate these individual aspects into the user experience, or occupant experience is probably the better word. There's another aspect at this point in the lighting debate that is really in the forefront, which is UVC lighting, which is basically battling, it's the whole health aspect, battling germs, including the coronavirus, with the radiation or the invisible light that the lighting device, as we call it now, not light fixture anymore, is emitting. So I think there are a lot of layers that are coming to it. And by allowing the individual control, you will be able to develop these new user cases. I think by prohibiting that, you will not get really, new innovation that infuses the space.
Emmanuel, Beatrice mentioned home automation, that our homes are way smarter than our offices are. And I'm sure we all, suffer with that kind of dichotomy between my house. I can pick up my phone, or I can tell Alexa to do anything in my house, turn on the lights, lock the door, close the garage door. Now we've got wearables where, we can track our movement. We can go for a walk and see how far we went. We've got IoT everywhere, and we use it without hesitation in our everyday lives. Everything's connected, everything's voice command. So when we look at the difference between what we've accepted in our day-to-day lives and in our homes versus what we've accepted in the office, talk a little bit about that and where you kind of see that split, and how is Microsoft trying to take a lot of the technologies that we're used to outside the building and bring it inside the building?
Great points, Darlene. And I think you said it very well when you said the technology exists, right? There's no rocket science, technology is there, but the hesitation has always been, why should we use it and where should we use it in? If you look at the home, the difference is, in a home environment, I control everything, I own everything. So I have that comfort feeling where I go out and buy things thinking that they are a necessity for me, right? So I don't hesitate. I will have more devices than I need, tracking water levels to make sure there's no leak in my basement. But then when I shift from that mindset and I go into a corporate environment where I have an office, the apprehension is, why do people need that type of data about me? Why do they want to know the ambient noise levels I want to operate in? Why do they want to know whether I prefer to sit near a window because I love natural light? Or, hey, guess what? I love a warm light setting because under warm light, I perform at my peak levels of output, right? And that's where the challenges start to come in, where you start giving up control to trusting the service provider to ensure that they're creating the service so that you can be the most productive version of yourself. And that's where the challenges start to come in. I'm a big proponent of empowerment, and I believe space is used to empower people to do things that they could not. Now, when you are transitioning from a home environment is all about you, your family, your space. When you're transitioning to a corporate environment, it's about collaboration and engagement with people outside of a family. Some people I have just met them, some people are colleagues, some people are guests. How do you drive that comfort feel? And that's where it starts to come in. So in that space, if I have to have 10 different people like we are today, different companies on a panel, if we all have to get together and have an ad hoc brainstorming session, what type of data are you willing to give up so we all can have the most productive use of our time, learning from each other, engaging one another, and yet feeling safe and comfortable operating in an environment that is suitable to us? So identifying those types of services and the data that is needed to support those services is very, very challenging. And that's what we always say. What do people want and what are they looking to achieve in a space? And Beatrice, I think you made a beautiful point around the importance of lighting and what lighting does for us today. Now, we've also started to realize, especially in Redmond, when you look at the weather, right, we all start to appreciate natural lighting much more than we normally would. But does that mean I make seats available for everybody near the window? Not everybody would like that. You also have noise levels, you have touch levels, you have interaction with natural environments surrounding you. Bringing all of it in and creating a comfortable environment that is safe and secure, and empowering the user to decide that, yes, I would like to give up this data because I'm getting a higher quality of service than I would get at home, is one of the biggest challenges we're trying to overcome.
So Tim, let's go back to the technical conversation about IoT. And one of the questions I have, we've got all these devices, we've got terabytes of data. How do you manage all the IoT devices? Because they're running over different frequencies and different protocols and different networks, and you got everything everywhere. How do you manage all those IoT devices and manage them in a way that creates more of a kind of a converged virtual IoT network, if you will?
Yeah, sort of a single pane of glass, maybe is what.
Right, right.
Good luck, but no, I think Emmanuel hit on, and so did Chris, hit on collaboration, and just from an overall process management, where a simple outage might affect, for example, the use case that Emmanuel brought up about business continuity and a generator. Okay, how do you make sure that the appropriate people are notified to take the appropriate action? And I think in the case of like Microsoft, it's because it's such a hyper-focused organization, they're going to have a better way of handling that than perhaps maybe a different portfolio manager or building ownership concern, which doesn't necessarily have their own dedicated IT group because they've got constituents in there that have their own IT that's providing their own IT. So I think you really have to develop a thorough communications protocol, and you can call them run books or playbooks, but what happens when the worst happens? And how do you make sure that the appropriate people are notified of the severity level? And then how do you automate that notification process and the follow-up with that? So I think there's some organizational and theoretical approaches you might take first to join the different groups, like facilities versus IT. I mean, if you're CBRE, you've got everything you need, but if you're not CBRE, you might not have that. So the next thing is, to the extent that you can automate that, truly get to that single pane of glass. A lot of the providers for IoT now have their own cloud, so you can create cloud-to-cloud visibility. A lot of third parties now are also providing that single pane of glass that will give you visibility into all of your different IoT devices and controllers. So you have to be very selective in how you choose that, because what you don't want is what we used to call in cybersecurity and IT, which is alert fatigue. When every device is throwing something and somebody's sitting there looking at that and thinks that they have to do something about it. So a good procedure, a good set of procedures, and also great automation really help to join, because if we talk about all the different use cases that we've mentioned, that could be 4 to 6 different IoT vendors that you're incorporating into some form of management, whether it's on the facility side or whether it's on the IT side. So, establishing those, and then really establishing your parameters around when an outage occurs, or what type of visibility you want. What is your recovery point objective? What is your acceptable level of downtime for this particular IoT asset? So, and then, go from there. You can then map those into either automated playbooks, or you can map those into manual playbooks where it might be people doing that. You might be dispatching a technician out to the generator. But at least you have that covered, and now you've ensured all of the objectives for all the various constituents and users are met.
Yeah, you mentioned something about downtime of different devices. We've got thousands of IoT devices, many of which may be battery powered stick-on sensors that, 3 to 4 years from now, can be a lot of engineers running around replacing batteries. But I digress. So let's go to Chris and to follow up on what Tim was saying about how do you manage all of these IoT devices that may be on different networks. How do you pull it all together in kind of a more integrated, seamless strategy?
Well, again, we're more on the wireless side. So from a management perspective, we're talking about how do you deal with all these different frequencies that these devices are working on, and can you provide a system that can pull together all of these frequencies? Even now, people are talking about millimeter wave in building, which we're involved in, and that's rapidly developing. And so what we try and do in terms of managing at least the connectivity of these systems is to provide something that's very cost effective that can handle anything from 600 megahertz or even lower, all the way up to the millimeter wave band and 39 gigahertz. And what we've done is we've created a platform that's easy to manage, easy to evolve, because you're not going to, in many cases, want to use all these frequencies, but that can evolve over time from 4G to 5G, from different frequencies to millimeter wave, and have it all connected back in through these gateways that I was talking about to this central system that then gets the information to your centralized database. But that's really how we fit in, is more from a connectivity side.
Great. And just to wrap up, I know we're running out of time here, but I just want to wrap up with each of you sharing what's next. What's the next big thing in IoT that building owners need to prepare for? So Tim, we're going to start with you. What's the next big thing in IoT?
Siegeware. It's the idea, again, going, I love the discussion of IoT, but as an IT guy and a cyber guy, my biggest concern is, how do we protect all that? And what happens in the case where a virus or some malware is accidentally injected into this now, like you mentioned earlier, Darlene, this joined network of all these different devices that are helping to create this magnificent experience for our users. And all of a sudden some malware gets injected and now you've got a building under siege, and that's why I call it siegeware. But I would say the next big thing there is, one is identifying the potential exploits that can occur, and then identifying the protection mechanisms around it as well. So that would be, I think, the basis for any good IoT program is, security by design, resiliency by design, and a really solid network, because all of this is no good without a solid network like what Chris had mentioned.
It's like an IoT pandemic.
Yes.
Chris, what's the next big thing in IoT for you?
I think I'm excited about it. We haven't really talked about robotics all that much today, but in every vertical you can think of, we're working with robotic automation in just everything you can think of, from automated picking and warehousing to the automation of the manufacturing floor. And in commercial real estate, it's I think you're going to start to see some really exciting things there too, even in a COVID-19 world, in terms of robotic cleaning and those types of things. But I think robotics we're going to see some really cool things coming over the next several years.
That's a great next best thing. As a matter of fact, that would make a great panel at our next event. So watch out for that one. We will